Apple has finally announced the new Apple M1 Pro, which we thought would be the Apple M1X, and Apple claims it's the first time anyone has created an SoC design for a pro-level laptop, otherwise known as mobile workstations. While Apple might have used the same M1 chip for a variety of MacBook models, if you check with a bit more diligence on the company's website, those differences start to become more pronounced. Big talk of an Apple Silicon upgrade being imminent, so unless you need to replace one urgently, best to hold off for the time being. Before starting the video, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe to never miss out on any of our videos. It's been a long wait, but this fall, Apple's flagship 16-inch MacBook Pro finally gets the Apple M1 Silicon treatment. In addition to ditching Intel processors for Cupertino's own M1 Pro and M1 Max, the biggest of the MacBook Pros gains more input-output ports and a gorgeous new XDR display. Been holding out for that 16-inch MacBook Pro? Well, your wait is about to end. Apple just announced the new long-awaited laptop, which comes rocking slimmer bezels, a return to legacy ports, and Apple's new M1 Pro and M1 Max. An update from DieLandKT on Twitter talks about the M1X MacBook Pro touting the same performance irrespective if you purchase the 14-inch and 16-inch variants. Since both sizes will feature the same M1X processor, the performance gains are bound to be similar unless Apple decides to otherwise. The current 16-inch MacBook Pro features Intel's powerful chips with better thermals compared to the 13-inch model. It's a great option for users who opt for a smaller size but don't want to compromise on the performance. However, the M1X MacBook Pro might see a price increase according to the leaker. The new 14-inch MacBook Pro starts at $1,999 and the new 16-inch MacBook Pro starts at $2,499. If you don't need the power of these high-end MacBooks nor the budget, you can spend less on the M1-powered MacBook Air or 13-inch MacBook Pro. The MacBook Air starts at $999 and the 13-inch MacBook Pro starts at $1,299. There are a couple of ways to grab either at a discount. M1 Pro delivers up to 32 GB of unified RAM and incredibly fast memory bandwidth, which should make it extremely powerful, especially when combined with the 10-core design. These new chips should be available soon, though we're still not sure which laptops will be supported right now. Although Apple is claiming that the Apple M1 Pro, along with the more powerful Apple M1 Max, will be the most powerful chips for Pro laptops, we'll have to put that to the test, but it's looking promising. The base configuration 16-inch MacBook Pro is $100 more expensive than its predecessor, and prices increase steeply when you add the M1 Max processor option along with the extraordinary amounts of memory up to 64 GB and storage up to 8 TB that Apple offers. What's more, nearly all of the standard and optional features of the 16-inch MacBook Pro are also available on the smaller 14-inch model at lower prices. If you're looking for a more affordable Apple Silicon MacBook Pro, there's the M1 MacBook, which sports the same processor as the M1 MacBook Pro, a 13.3-inch display, Touch ID, and ports, as well as most other hardware features for a price starting at $999. For casual users, this means that the additional $300 to get the M1 MacBook Pro may be difficult to justify. It's a more consumer-oriented and slightly less capable machine compared to the MacBook Pro, but is more than adequate for most users. So your choice really comes down to size, weight, and price. If you can stomach spending a lot of extra dough and carrying around a significantly bulkier and heavier chassis for 2 additional inches of screen real estate, the 16-incher is a no-brainer. But if you're like many pros looking for a blend of portability and power, we suspect that these compromises might turn you off, especially if you've already got an external monitor at home or the office to do most of your multitasking and other tasks that require big screens. In terms of the display, the new 16-inch MacBook has a 16.2-inch display, is boasting a 3456 x 2234 resolution compared to 3072 x 1920 of its predecessor. There's also space for more memory than with the Apple M1, which is good right now. You can only get up to 16 GB of RAM on the M1. That's fine for most casual users, but creative professionals need way more memory. Luckily, the M1 Pro will support up to 32 GB of unified memory, and the M1X will support up to 64 GB. That does mean we're unlikely to see the M1X in the Mac Pro, but it's going to be more than enough for most professionals using apps like Final Cut and Blender to get their work done. More memory is only half of the story though. Apple has also boosted memory bandwidth, and by a lot. The Apple M1 Pro boasts up to 200 GB per second of memory bandwidth, another important spec for creative users. Apple also shrank the bezels, making the sides 24% thinner and the top a whopping 60% slimmer. If that wasn't enough, the panel is capable of a 120Hz refresh rate and supports up to 1 billion colors. The Apple M1 was such an incredible processor because it was able to do some high-performance computing without consuming too much power, which meant it led to some incredible battery life, and it looks like Apple is trying to bring that same design idea to the 16-inch MacBook Pro. This time, the Apple M1 Pro is a 10-core chip, but while that's just 2 more cores than the original Apple M1, it's double the amount of high-performance cores. The M1 Pro has 8 high-performance cores and 2 efficiency cores, compared to the 4 high-performance cores and 4 efficiency cores in the original chip. That means that the M1 Pro is going to be way faster than the M1, but we might start to see battery life start to take a loss, but we'd expect that with a larger chip either way. The GPU is also getting a huge bump. In the Apple M1 Pro, you're getting 2048 execution units EUs, which is a massive increase over the 128 EUs found in the original M1, but because Apple is putting so much focus into power efficiency, Apple found a way to put this in a GPU that apparently only peaks at around 30 watt, but is exponentially faster than what's found in the integrated GPUs you'd find in an Intel processor. The Apple M1 will have a much more powerful GPU. It'll include 32 cores, which means you can get up to 4096 EUs. However, it's a bit harder to figure out exactly what the spec would look like. We're sure it's going to be clocked much higher because Apple's own graphs indicate that it'll use up to 50 watts of power, but while reaching nearly the same level of performance as a top-end laptop graphic card in a MSI GE76 Raider. It's not often that input and output ports become a headlining feature on a laptop, but it's certainly the case with the new MacBook Pro. 5 years ago, Apple ditched most of the ports on its laptops, doubling down on USB-C, Thunderbolt. The internet complained endlessly, with reviewers and commenters complaining that laptops need more than just one type of port. Yet Apple persisted until this generation of Pro. Of course, USB-C is versatile depending on how it's implemented. It can do battery charging, display output, even 40 gigabits per second. Thunderbolt transfers to external drives. But professional users with complicated setups of peripherals simply need more I/O variety, and Apple has restored that variety with the new MacBook Pro. A dedicated HDMI output is back for connecting external monitors without an adapter cable or dongle, and the SD card reader also makes a welcome reappearance. Overall, the 13-inch MacBook Pro is the best option for normal consumers. The 13-inch MacBook Pro is actually more akin to a MacBook Air than its high-end siblings, being more than good enough for the needs of casual users. It's lighter, smaller, and more portable than the 14-inch MacBook Pro professionals who require larger and more accurate displays, additional ports, more memory and storage, hardware acceleration for media, and a very high level of performance should look to the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro. These high-end MacBook Pros are not targeted at everyday consumers, being clearly tailored for creatives and professionals who rely heavily on the capabilities of their machines. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out the following videos here.